Standing outside my childhood home, clutching the inheritance documents that would change everything, I never imagined my own mother would orchestrate the most devastating betrayal of my life. What started as an innocent family dinner invitation turned into an ambush that revealed 25 years of lies, manipulation, and a conspiracy so twisted it destroyed every relationship I thought I could trust. The woman who raised me had been planning this moment since the day I was born, and when I discovered the truth about my real identity, everything I believed about family loyalty crumbled instantly. Before we dive into this shocking family revenge story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you're ready to hear how I turned the tables on the people who betrayed me, most hit that like button and subscribe because this tale of family vengeance will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when blood isn't thicker than water after all. My name is Scarlett Rivera, and 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect family. My adoptive parents, Margaret and Robert Thompson, had raised me since I was 3 years old, after my biological parents supposedly died in a car accident. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I was their golden child. Valedictorian, full scholarship to Columbia, and now a successful patent attorney at 28. Everything seemed picture perfect until my biological grandmother, Elena Rivera, passed away and left me an inheritance that would expose the most sinister family secret imaginable. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. A lawyer named Jonathan Mills contacted me about Elena Rivera's will, explaining that she had left me her entire estate, including a Victorian mansion in Salem, Massachusetts, and approximately $2.8 million. I was stunned. I had never heard of Elena Rivera, and when I mentioned it to my adoptive mother, Margaret, her reaction was immediate and suspicious. "You must be mistaken, honey," Margaret said, her voice strangely tight. "Your biological family died when you were young. There couldn't possibly be any living relatives." But the documentation was ironclad. Elena Rivera was indeed my paternal grandmother, and according to the will, she had been searching for me for 25 years. The inheritance package included a letter that made my blood run cold. Elena had written that she never stopped looking for me after my parents' accident, and she had recently discovered that Margaret and Robert Thompson were not who they claimed to be. That evening, I drove to Salem to meet with the estate attorney. Jonathan Mills was a kind man in his 60s who had worked with Elena for decades. He handed me a manila envelope with my name written in elegant cursive. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said solemnly. "She spent her life savings on private investigators trying to find you. What she discovered about your adoption will shock you." Inside the envelope were photographs, legal documents, and a 20-page letter that revealed the most horrifying truth imaginable. My biological parents, Maria and Diego Rivera, had not died in a car accident. They had been murdered by Margaret Thompson, my adoptive mother, who had been having an affair with my biological father for 2 years before the killings. According to Elena's investigation, Margaret had worked as a nurse at the hospital where my father was treated for a minor injury. She became obsessed with him and our family's wealth. My parents owned a successful import business and had recently updated their life insurance policies. Margaret discovered that my father had been planning to leave her and reconcile with my mother, so she staged the accident that killed both of them. But the most devastating part was yet to come. The documents revealed that Robert Thompson, the man I called Dad, was Margaret's accomplice. He had helped her dispose of evidence and create false documentation for my adoption. They had stolen me from the scene before emergency responders arrived, claiming I was their biological daughter to avoid suspicion. Elena's letter continued with details that made me physically sick. Margaret had been collecting the life insurance money from my parents' policies for 25 years, claiming to be a surviving business partner. The Thompsons had used this money to fund their comfortable lifestyle, pay for my education, and maintain their facade as loving adoptive parents. The final piece of evidence was a recorded confession. Elena had hired a private investigator who had secretly recorded Margaret admitting to the murders during what she thought was a confidential conversation with her sister. In the recording, Margaret laughed about how easy it had been to fool everyone, including me. That little girl never suspected a thing. Margaret's voice crackled through the audio device. She actually thinks we saved her from tragedy. If she only knew we created the tragedy, she would probably have a complete mental breakdown. Sitting in that lawyer's office, listening to the woman who had raised me discuss my parents' murder like it was a successful business transaction, I felt my entire world collapse. Every birthday celebration, every Mother's Day gift, every time I had thanked Margaret for rescuing me from a life of foster care, it had all been built on the foundation of her murdering my real parents. Jonathan explained that Elena had been preparing to expose the truth and press criminal charges when she suffered a fatal heart attack. She had updated her will just weeks before her death, leaving everything to me with specific instructions to pursue justice. She wanted you to have the resources to fight them, Jonathan said, and she wanted you to know that your real parents loved you desperately. They died trying to protect you. I drove home that night in a daze, my mind racing with questions and rage. How many times had Margaret comforted me when I cried about missing parents I never knew? How many times had Robert told me stories about their heroic decision to adopt a traumatized child? Every family vacation, every college graduation, celebration, every moment of love I thought we shared had been contaminated by their monstrous secret. But as I pulled into the driveway of the house where I grew up, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to confront them immediately. I was not going to break down crying or demand answers. Instead, I was going to play their game better than they ever could. Margaret and Robert had spent 25 years believing they had gotten away with murder. They had raised me, taken my love, and built their lives on the blood of my real parents. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had raised me to be smart, strategic, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of justice. As I walked through the front door and smiled at Margaret, who was waiting up to ask about my mysterious inheritance, I began planning their downfall. They wanted to know about Elena Rivera's money, and I could see the greed in Margaret's eyes as she pretended to be concerned about my emotional well-being. "So, what did this supposed grandmother leave you?" Margaret asked, trying to sound casual. I looked at the woman who had murdered my parents, stolen my childhood, and lied to me for 25 years, and I smiled sweetly. "Actually, Mom, she left me everything. And she wanted me to invite the whole family over for dinner this weekend to celebrate. Would you mind helping me plan something special?" The trap was set, and Margaret Thompson had no idea she was about to walk directly into it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day developing what I privately called Operation Karma. Elena's inheritance had given me more than money. It had given me the tools for perfect revenge. I contacted 3 of the city's best criminal attorneys, a forensic accountant, and a private investigator who specialized in cold cases. By noon, I had assembled a team that would make Margaret and Robert's worst nightmares come true. My first stop was the district attorney's office. Armed with Elena's evidence, I met with prosecutor Sarah Chen, who specialized in murder cases. Sarah was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had built her reputation on solving seemingly impossible crimes. "This is extraordinary," Sarah said, reviewing the audio recordings and financial documents. "We have enough evidence to file murder charges, insurance fraud, kidnapping, and identity theft. But I need to ask, are you prepared for what this will do to your life? These are the people who raised you." I looked her directly in the eyes. "These are the people who murdered my parents and stole my entire existence. I want them to face every possible consequence." Sarah nodded grimly. "Then we're going to need to be strategic. If we move too quickly, they might destroy evidence or flee the country. We need them to incriminate themselves further." Together, we developed a plan that would require me to continue living with Margaret and Robert while wearing a wire and gathering additional evidence. The FBI would be monitoring everything, and I would have backup at all times. But the most important element of our strategy was the family dinner I had already proposed. Sarah's team had discovered that Margaret had 3 siblings who had been complicit in various aspects of the cover-up. Her sister Janet had helped create false adoption paperwork. Her brother Paul had laundered some of the insurance money through his construction business, and her youngest sister Lisa had provided Margaret with an alibi the night of the murders. We needed all of them in one room, believing they were safe so they would talk freely about their crimes. That evening, I returned home and began playing the role of my life. Margaret was immediately suspicious about my sudden good mood, but I had prepared for her questions. "I keep thinking about what you always told me," I said, sitting at the kitchen table where she was preparing dinner, "about how family is everything and how we should always take care of each other. This inheritance feels like a blessing that I want to share with everyone who matters to me." Margaret's greed overcame her caution. "How much money are we talking about, sweetie?" "Almost $3 million, I said, watching her pupils dilate with avarice. "Plus property and investments. I was thinking we could pay off your mortgage, maybe take that European vacation you and Dad have always talked about." Robert entered the kitchen just as I mentioned the money, and I watched him exchange a meaningful glance with Margaret. They thought they had won the lottery. "That's incredibly generous of you, Scarlett," Robert said, his voice thick with false emotion. "You've always been such a thoughtful daughter." The word daughter made my stomach turn, but I maintained my smile. "I owe everything to you both. Without you, I would have had nothing." Over the next 3 days, I watched Margaret and Robert's true personalities emerge as they planned how to spend my inheritance. Margaret called her siblings to arrange the family dinner, and I could hear her whispering excitedly about the windfall. She had no idea that FBI agents were recording every conversation. Janet arrived from Boston on Friday afternoon, and I met her for the first time in years. She was a sharp-faced woman who worked in government administration, and she immediately began asking pointed questions about the inheritance documentation. "You need to be very careful about estate taxes," Janet said, her eyes cold and calculating. "There are ways to structure these things to minimize what you lose to the government." Paul and Lisa arrived Saturday morning with their families. Paul was a loud, boisterous man who owned a construction company, while Lisa was quiet and nervous, constantly checking her phone. All 3 siblings shared Margaret's predatory instincts, and I could see them mentally dividing up my inheritance before dinner was even served. But I had spent the week preparing my own surprise. Elena's private investigator had continued working even after her death, and he had discovered additional evidence that would destroy not just Margaret and Robert, but their entire criminal network. The most shocking revelation was that I was not their only victim. Margaret and Robert had adopted another child 15 years ago, a little boy named David, whose parents had also died under suspicious circumstances. David had aged out of foster care, believing his adoptive parents had abandoned him, never knowing that Margaret and Robert had killed his real parents and collected life insurance money in his name as well. I had contacted David through social media, and after sharing Elena's evidence with him, he agreed to attend the family dinner. He was now 33 years old, working as a mechanic in Vermont, and he had spent his entire adult life believing he was unwanted and unloved. When he learned the truth about Margaret and Robert, his rage matched my own. "They destroyed 2 families," David said during our phone conversation. "How many other children are out there who don't know what really happened to their parents?" The FBI investigation had uncovered at least 4 other suspicious deaths connected to Margaret's nursing career and Robert's insurance business. They had been operating a murder-for-profit scheme for decades, targeting families with young children and substantial life insurance policies. As I prepared for Saturday's dinner, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Margaret and Robert had raised me to be intelligent, ambitious, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of my goals. They had created their own nemesis without realizing it. Every lesson they had taught me about strategy, patience, and attention to detail would be used to destroy them. I spent Saturday afternoon cooking my real mother's, favorite Puerto Rican dishes recipes I had found in Elena's inheritance package. Maria Rivera had been an incredible cook, and her mother had preserved every recipe card, every family tradition that Margaret had stolen from me. As I seasoned the pernil and prepared the sofrito, I thought about the parents I would never know, the childhood that had been stolen from me, and the 25 years of lies that were about to come crashing down. At 6 o'clock, the entire Thompson family would gather in the dining room where I had celebrated countless birthdays and holidays. They would expect to hear about my generous plans for sharing Elena Rivera's fortune. Instead, they were about to learn that their perfect crime had finally caught up with them, and the daughter they had raised was about to become their worst nightmare. The dining room had never looked more beautiful or more sinister. I had set the table with Margaret's finest china, the expensive set she had purchased with my parents' life insurance money. Candles flickered in silver holders that Robert had bought after collecting payment for his construction company's role in laundering blood money. Every elegant detail was purchased with the profits from murder, and tonight that irony would finally be exposed. David arrived first, and I introduced him to the family as an old friend from college. Margaret and Robert were polite but clearly annoyed by the unexpected guest. They had planned to spend the evening discussing how to access my inheritance, and David's presence complicated their agenda. "I hope you don't mind," I said sweetly. "David has some experience with estate planning, and I thought his advice might be helpful." Janet, Paul, and Lisa arrived together, bringing their spouses and children. The house filled with the sound of family chatter and laughter, the same warm atmosphere I had cherished during countless holidays. But now every smile felt poisonous, every hug felt like betrayal. As we sat down to dinner, I noticed Margaret admiring the Puerto Rican feast I had prepared. "This smells incredible, honey. Where did you learn to make all these dishes?" "Family recipes," I replied, watching her face carefully. "Apparently, they've been passed down through generations of Rivera women." Margaret's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and I caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She remembered my real family's name, even if she thought I did not. "How lovely," she said, her voice slightly strained. "It's nice when family traditions survive." The irony was exquisite. Margaret was complimenting me on honoring the memory of the family she had destroyed. Throughout dinner, I listened to the Thompson siblings discuss their various business ventures and financial struggles. Paul complained about slow payments from recent construction jobs, while Lisa mentioned her husband's medical bills and their mounting credit card debt. Janet grumbled about her government salary and the cost of her daughter's private school tuition. They were all drowning in debt, which explained why my inheritance announcement had generated such immediate excitement. They needed my money desperately, and they felt entitled to it because they viewed me as their property. After clearing the dinner plates, I served Elena's famous flan recipe and poured coffee for everyone. Then I stood up and cleared my throat. I wanted to bring everyone together tonight because family is the most important thing in the world. I began, my voice steady and warm. "You've all been such incredible influences in my life, and I learned so much about loyalty, trust, and what it means to take care of the people you love." Margaret beamed with maternal pride, completely oblivious to the trap closing around her. "As you all know, I recently inherited a substantial amount of money from a grandmother I never knew existed," I continued. "It got me thinking about family history, about the people who came before us, and about the importance of knowing where we come from." I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a manila envelope. "Elena Rivera left me more than money. She left me the truth about my real family, my real parents, and what really happened the night they died." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret's coffee cup rattled against her saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. "Scarlet, honey, maybe we should discuss this privately," Margaret said, her voice tight with barely concealed panic. "Actually, I think everyone should hear this," I replied, opening the envelope, "because it turns out that almost everyone in this room played a role in covering up the murder of Maria and Diego Rivera." Janet gasped and knocked over her wine glass, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Paul's face went ash gray, and Lisa started crying immediately. "You don't understand," Margaret said, standing up abruptly. "You're confused, sweetheart. Let me explain." "Sit down, Mom," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I understand perfectly." I pulled out the audio recording device and placed it in the center of the table. Elena Rivera spent 25 years investigating what happened to her son and daughter-in-law. She hired the best private investigators money could buy, and she recorded every conversation, documented every lie, and traced every dollar of stolen insurance money. Robert tried to stand, but David moved to block the doorway. My old college friend was actually 6 feet 3 inches tall and had spent years working construction. No one was leaving until this conversation was finished. "Janet," I continued, turning to Margaret's sister, "you worked at the Department of Vital Statistics when I was adopted. You falsified my birth certificate and created adoption paperwork that listed Margaret and Robert as my biological parents. The FBI has copies of the original documents you destroyed." Janet's face crumpled. "Margaret said it was just paperwork. She said you were an orphan who needed a family." "Paul," I interrupted, shifting my gaze to Margaret's brother, "your construction company received $150,000 in insurance payments for emergency home repairs that never actually happened. You laundered the money through fake invoices and helped Margaret hide the paper trail." Paul's hands were shaking so violently he could not hold his coffee cup. "I didn't know anyone had died. Margaret said it was insurance fraud, not murder. And Lisa," I said, turning to the youngest sibling, "you provided Margaret with an alibi for the night my parents were killed. You told police that Margaret was at your apartment helping with your newborn baby when actually she was staging a car accident that would look like a tragic collision." Lisa was sobbing openly now. "She blackmailed me. She said if I didn't help, she would tell my husband about the affair I had. I never knew she was going to kill anyone." "Enough!" Margaret screamed, her mask of maternal love finally slipping away completely. "You ungrateful little bitch. Do you have any idea what we sacrificed to raise you? We gave you everything. Education, opportunities, love. And this is how you repay us. You gave me nothing," I said quietly. "You murdered my parents, stole my inheritance, and built your entire life on their blood. Every dollar you spent on my education came from their life insurance policies. Every family vacation, every birthday present, every moment of stability I had was purchased with the profits from murdering Maria and Diego Rivera." Robert finally found his voice. "You can't prove any of this. It's all speculation and hearsay." I pressed play on the audio device, and Margaret's voice filled the dining room. "That little girl never suspected a thing. She actually thinks we saved her from tragedy. If she only knew we created the tragedy, she would probably have a complete mental breakdown." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went white as she realized her own words had condemned her. "There's more," I said, producing additional recordings. Margaret discussing how easy it was to kill my parents. Robert talking about disposing of evidence. Janet laughing about falsifying government documents. Paul bragging about money laundering. Lisa describing exactly how she lied to police. David stepped forward and produced his own envelope of documents. "And then there's my stories," he said. "Because Scarlett and I aren't your only victims." Margaret's legs gave out and she collapsed back into her chair as David explained how his parents had also been murdered by Margaret and Robert 15 years ago. How they had collected life insurance money in his name, abandoned him to foster care, and left him to grow up believing he was unwanted and unloved. The children at the table, my cousins who had grown up thinking of me as family, stared at their parents in horror as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. But I wasn't finished yet. The FBI agents listening outside were getting everything they needed, but I wanted Margaret and Robert to understand exactly how completely their world was about to collapse. The best part, I said, smiling for the first time that evening, is that Elena Rivera didn't just leave me evidence. She left me a complete plan for destroying all of you, and I've spent the last week implementing every single detail. The real fireworks were about to begin. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtains, revealing FBI vehicles surrounding the house. Spotlights illuminated the driveway, and agents in tactical gear were positioning themselves at every exit. The trap Elena Rivera had spent 25 years planning was finally springing shut. "What have you done?" Margaret whispered, her face contorting with rage and terror. "I've given you exactly what you deserve," I replied calmly. Elena's inheritance included more than money and evidence. She left me detailed instructions for orchestrating your complete destruction, and I've followed every single step. Agent Sarah Martinez entered through the front door flanked by 6 federal agents. She held up her badge and addressed the room with professional authority. "Everyone remain seated. This is a federal investigation into multiple counts of murder insurance fraud, money laundering, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Margaret Thompson and Robert Thompson, you are under arrest for the murders of Maria Rivera, Diego Rivera, Jennifer Collins, and Marcus Collins." Margaret lurched to her feet, pointing out an accusatory finger at me. "She's lying. This is all fabricated. I raised that ungrateful brat from nothing, and now she's trying to destroy our family with made-up stories." Agent Martinez produced a thick folder of evidence. "Mrs. Thompson, we have 25 years of financial records showing systematic insurance fraud. We have audio recordings of you confessing to multiple murders. We have testimony from witnesses who helped you cover up your crimes. And we have DNA evidence from crime scenes that was preserved by Elena Rivera's private investigators." The DNA evidence was Elena's masterstroke. Her team had secretly collected blood samples from the vehicles involved in my parents' supposed accident, and modern forensic technology had revealed Margaret's fingerprints and Robert's DNA on evidence that had been stored for decades. Janet tried to run for the back door, but federal agents were already waiting. As she was handcuffed, she screamed at Margaret, "You told me they died in an accident. You said Scarlett was an orphan who needed help. I never would have falsified those documents if I knew you were a murderer." Paul collapsed onto the floor, clutching his chest. "I can't breathe," he gasped. "This can't be happening. Margaret, tell them this is all a mistake." But Margaret had stopped protesting. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the audio device that had captured her confession. 25 years of believing she was untouchable had just evaporated in a single evening. Lisa was hyperventilating as agents read her rights. "My children," she sobbed. "What's going to happen to my children?" "They don't know anything about this." Agent Martinez addressed the room again. "Janet Thompson, Paul Thompson, and Lisa Henderson, you are under arrest as accessories to murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Your children will be placed in protective custody until family members can be contacted." I watched my cousins, innocent children who had just learned their parents were criminals, being led away by social workers. My heart broke for them, but I reminded myself that their parents' crimes had to be exposed. These children deserved to know the truth, just as I had deserved to know what really happened to my parents. David stepped forward and addressed Robert directly. "You destroyed my family when I was 8 years old. You killed my parents, stole my inheritance, and threw me away like garbage. I spent 25 years believing I was worthless because you convinced everyone that my parents had abandoned me." Robert's facade of respectability finally cracked completely. "You have no idea what your parents were like," he snarled. They were drug dealers and criminals. We did society a favor by getting rid of them." "That's a lie," David shouted back. "My parents owned a legitimate import business. They were community leaders who donated to charity and volunteered at their church. You murdered them because Margaret was obsessed with my father and couldn't handle rejection." Agent Martinez intervened before the confrontation could escalate. "Mr. Thompson, anything you say can and will be used against you in court. I strongly advise you to contact an attorney." But Robert was beyond rational thought. Years of suppressed guilt and paranoia were exploding in a torrent of self-incrimination. "You want to know the truth? Fine Margaret fell in love with Diego Rivera, and when he chose his wife over her, she lost her mind. She planned the whole thing. The accident, the adoption, the insurance claims. I just helped clean up the mess because I loved her." Margaret turned on him with fury. "Shut your mouth, you idiot. Don't you understand they're trying to destroy us?" "They already have destroyed us," Robert screamed back. "Look around, Margaret. It's over. Everything we built is gone." Agent Martinez signaled to her team, and both Margaret and Robert were handcuffed and led towards separate vehicles. As Margaret passed my chair, she leaned down and whispered with pure venom, "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've lost. We were the only family you ever had, and now you're alone." I looked up at the woman who had murdered my parents and smiled. "I was never alone, Margaret. I have Elena's family now, my real family. And I have David, who survived your cruelty just like I did. Most importantly, I have the truth, which is something you'll never understand." Margaret's face twisted with rage as agents pulled her away. "You'll regret this. You'll spend the rest of your life wishing you had just taken the money and kept your mouth shut." As the house emptied of criminals and federal agents, I found myself standing alone in the dining room where I had celebrated every major milestone of my life. The elegant table setting was destroyed. Wine stains, shattered glasses, and scattered papers telling the story of a family dynasty built on murder and lies. David approached and put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and looked around the room one final time. "I'm better than okay," I said. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and where I came from. Elena Rivera gave me more than an inheritance. She gave me my identity back." Agent Martinez returned with final paperwork and updates on the investigation. "This case is going to make national news," she said. Margaret and Robert were operating a murder-for-profit scheme that spanned multiple states and decades. Your courage in exposing them has potentially saved countless future victims." The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if years of oppressive lies had finally been lifted. Margaret and Robert's carefully constructed world of respectability had collapsed in a single evening, and their victims could finally rest in peace. But as I walked through the rooms where I had grown up, I realized that my real journey was just beginning. Elena Rivera had given me the tools for revenge, but now I had to figure out how to build a life based on truth instead of lies. The family that raised me was gone forever, but the family that truly belonged to me was finally within reach. The next 72 hours transformed my quiet suburban neighborhood into a media circus. News vans lined the street, reporters camped outside the Thompson house, and every major network wanted exclusive interviews about the inheritance murder conspiracy. The story had everything that captivated public attention: family betrayal, decades of deception, and a shocking revenge plot that brought justice to multiple murder victims. I spent Monday morning at the FBI field office providing additional testimony and reviewing evidence that would be presented at trial. Agent Martinez explained that Margaret and Robert's arrests had triggered a massive federal investigation into similar crimes across multiple states. "Your adoptive parents weren't just opportunistic killers," Agent Martinez said, spreading crime scene photos across the conference table. "They were serial murderers who targeted families with specific characteristics. Young children, substantial life insurance policies, and limited extended family who might ask difficult questions. The full scope of Margaret and Robert's criminal enterprise was staggering. Over 23 years, they had murdered at least 8 people across 4 states, collected over $6 million in fraudulent insurance claims, and destroyed countless families. Each crime followed the same pattern. Margaret would identify vulnerable families through her nursing connections. Robert would research their financial situations, and together they would stage accidents that appeared tragic but were actually carefully planned executions. David and I met with Elena Rivera's estate attorney to review the inheritance documents and plan our next steps. Jonathan Mills had worked with Elena for decades, and he shared stories about her relentless pursuit of justice that brought tears to my eyes. "Your grandmother never stopped believing she would find you," Jonathan said. "She hired private investigators, contacted law enforcement agencies, and spent every penny she had trying to expose the truth. When her health began failing, she updated her will to ensure you would have the resources to finish what she started." Elena had left detailed instructions for how her inheritance should be used. Beyond providing financial security for David and me, she wanted us to establish a foundation that would help other victims of family-related crimes. She had researched similar cases nationwide and identified dozens of cold cases that shared characteristics with our parents' murders. She believed that Margaret and Robert weren't unique, Jonathan explained. "There are other predators out there targeting families, and Elena wanted you to have the tools to stop them." The media attention brought unexpected allies and revelations. 3 families contacted the FBI with suspicions about relatives who had died under circumstances similar to our parents. A former nursing colleague of Margaret's called with information about suspicious patient deaths that had been dismissed as natural causes. Even Janet's ex-husband came forward with evidence that she had forged government documents for other clients beyond our adoption case. But the most shocking revelation came from Margaret's sister Lisa, who agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. During her confession, Lisa revealed that Margaret had been planning to kill me once I turned 30. "Margaret was obsessed with controlling Scarlett's inheritance," Lisa told investigators. "She planned to stage another accident right after Scarlett's 30th birthday, when the life insurance policies would pay out maximum benefits. Margaret had already researched the best ways to make it look like suicide or overdose." Learning that Margaret had been planning my murder while playing the role of loving mother was devastating, but somehow not surprising. Every hug, every birthday celebration, every moment of supposed maternal love had been calculated manipulation designed to keep me compliant until she could profit from my death. The Thompson family's financial empire crumbled as quickly as their criminal conspiracy. Federal agents seized all assets purchased with insurance fraud proceeds, including the family home, Robert's construction business, and multiple investment accounts. Margaret and Robert's combined debts exceeded $2 million, and their victims' families were filing civil lawsuits that would ensure they never benefited from their crimes again. Janet, Paul, and Lisa faced federal charges that would result in lengthy prison sentences. Janet lost her government job and pension. Paul's construction company was shuttered after investigators discovered decades of money laundering, and Lisa's marriage ended when her husband filed for divorce and demanded full custody of their children. The Thompson family's social circle disintegrated as friends and neighbors learned the truth about their respected community members. Margaret had been a beloved volunteer at the local hospital. Robert had coached youth baseball for 15 years, and both had been regular church attendees who donated generously to charity. Everyone who had known them struggled to reconcile their public personas with their private crimes. Local news interviews revealed the depth of their deception. Former neighbors described Margaret as the perfect mother, and Robert as a pillar of the community. Their pastor spoke about their unwavering faith and commitment to helping others. Teachers who had worked with me praised Margaret's dedication to my education and Robert's support for school fundraisers. But the most powerful testimony came from David, who agreed to a television interview about his experience as another victim of their crimes. Watching him describe growing up in foster care while Margaret and Robert lived comfortably on his parents' life insurance money was heartbreaking and infuriating. "They didn't just kill our parents," David said during the interview. "They stole our entire lives." Scarlett grew up thinking she was loved and protected, while I grew up believing I was unwanted and abandoned. Both of us were living lies that Margaret and Robert created to serve their own purposes. The interview generated national attention and prompted other potential victims to come forward. The FBI established a dedicated hotline for families with suspicions about unexplained deaths, and within a week they had received over 300 calls. Elena Rivera's plan for justice was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams. Not only were Margaret and Robert facing life in prison for their crimes, but their exposure was helping solve cold cases across the country and preventing future murders. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the family dinner that destroyed the Thompson criminal empire, I stood in Elena's Victorian mansion in Salem, surrounded by photographs and mementos of the family I had never known. David was with me, and together we looked through albums filled with pictures of our parents, our grandparents, and the rich cultural heritage that Margaret had tried to steal from us. "Look at this," David said, pointing to a photograph of his father and mine playing guitar together at a family celebration. They were best friends. Our families spent holidays together, celebrated birthdays together, and supported each other through everything. Margaret didn't just murder individuals. She destroyed an entire community. As I held a photograph of my mother teaching me to walk in Elena's garden, I felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had raised me was sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting trial for multiple murders. But the family who truly belonged to me was finally within reach. Elena Rivera's inheritance had given me more than money or revenge. She had given me my identity, my history, and the tools to ensure that justice would finally be served. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse where Margaret Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 8 counts of first-degree murder. Robert received the same sentence for his role as an accomplice and co-conspirator. Janet was sentenced to 15 years for falsifying government documents and accessory charges. Paul received 12 years for money laundering and conspiracy, and Lisa was sentenced to 8 years for providing false testimony and obstruction of justice. The judge's final words to Margaret still echo in my mind. "You spent decades masquerading as a loving mother while planning the murder of the child you claim to protect. Your crimes represent a level of calculated evil that this court has rarely encountered. May you spend the remainder of your life contemplating the families you destroyed and the innocents you stole." Margaret showed no remorse during sentencing. She sat in her orange jumpsuit, staring straight ahead with the same cold expression I had seen the night of our family dinner. When given the opportunity to address the court, she simply said, "I have nothing to apologize for. I gave Scarlett Rivera a better life than she ever would have had with her real parents." Even facing life in prison, Margaret could not acknowledge the magnitude of her crimes or the devastation she had caused. She remained convinced that murdering my parents and stealing my childhood was somehow an act of mercy rather than pure evil. David and I used Elena's inheritance to establish the Rivera Family Justice Foundation, which provides resources for families investigating suspicious deaths and supports legislation to close loopholes in adoption procedures and insurance fraud prevention. In our first year, we helped reopen investigations into 23 cold cases and provided legal assistance to families who could not afford private investigators. The Foundation's work led to the arrests of 3 other family-related murder conspiracies, including a case in Oregon where adoptive parents had killed 4 sets of biological parents over a 10-year period. Elena's vision of exposing systematic family-related crimes was becoming reality, and her investment in justice was saving lives across the country. I left my job as a patent attorney and enrolled in law school specializing in criminal justice and victim advocacy. Representing families who had experienced betrayal similar to mine gave my life purpose that corporate law had never provided. Every case reminded me of Elena's dedication to seeking truth and protecting the innocent. David and I developed a relationship that transcended our shared trauma. We were not just fellow survivors. We became the siblings we had always been meant to be. He moved to Connecticut and started his own construction company specializing in renovating homes for low-income families. Together, we created the family dynamic that Margaret and Robert had destroyed when we were children. The most healing part of my journey was connecting with Elena's extended family and learning about my Puerto Rican heritage. I discovered cousins in San Juan, New York, and Chicago who welcomed me with open arms and helped me understand the cultural identity that Margaret had stolen from me. Learning Spanish, cooking traditional recipes, and participating in family celebrations filled spaces in my heart that I had not even realized were empty. My cousin Carmen Rivera became particularly important in my healing process. She was a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, and she helped me understand how Margaret's manipulation had affected my ability to trust and form healthy relationships. You survived 25 years of psychological manipulation by a master manipulator, Carmen explained during one of our sessions. The fact that you maintained your moral compass and sense of justice despite that environment speaks to the strength of character your parents gave you in those early years. Through therapy, I learned that my drive for academic achievement, my perfectionist tendencies, and my difficulty trusting others were all responses to growing up in an environment where love was conditional and reality was constantly being distorted. Margaret had raised me to believe that my worth depended on making her proud, never knowing that her pride was based on successfully controlling the daughter of people she had murdered. The house where I grew up was sold to pay restitution to victims' families. I drove past it one final time before the new owners moved in, and I felt nothing but relief. That building had been a monument to Margaret's deception, and I was grateful to see it become someone else's fresh start rather than remaining a shrine to her crimes. David and I purchased a home together in Salem, just a few miles from Elena's Victorian mansion. We converted the mansion into the Foundation's headquarters, creating offices for investigators, meeting rooms for support groups, and a memorial garden honoring all victims of family-related crimes. Elena's bedroom became a library filled with resources for families seeking justice, and her kitchen became a gathering place where survivors could share meals and stories. The media attention surrounding our case inspired a documentary film and a best-selling book about family betrayal and institutional failures in child protection services. Both projects donated proceeds to the foundation, and the increased public awareness led to legislative changes that made it harder for predators like Margaret and Robert to exploit adoption systems and insurance policies. But the most meaningful validation came from unexpected sources. Former neighbors who had known Margaret and Robert reached out to apologize for not recognizing the signs of their crimes. Teachers who had praised Margaret's parenting sent letters expressing their horror at learning the truth. Even the pastor from our family's church contacted me to acknowledge how thoroughly Margaret and Robert had deceived their entire community. "Evil often hides behind masks of respectability, so," he wrote in his letter. "Your courage in exposing the truth has helped all of us understand how easily we can be fooled by people who present themselves as pillars of morality while harboring the darkest intentions." As I write this story, it has been 2 years since that devastating family dinner that changed everything. Margaret and Robert are serving their life sentences in separate maximum security prisons, and they will never again have the opportunity to destroy innocent families. The Foundation has helped solve over 40 cold cases and prevented countless future crimes through improved legislation and public awareness. David recently got engaged to a wonderful woman who understands our story and supports our mission. I am pursuing a relationship with someone who appreciates my commitment to justice and does not see my past as baggage to overcome. We are both learning how to build healthy relationships based on trust and honesty rather than manipulation and control. Elena Rivera's inheritance gave me more than money or revenge. It gave me the chance to transform devastating trauma into meaningful purpose. Every family we help, every case we solve, every predator we expose honors the memory of Maria and Diego Rivera and ensures that their deaths ultimately saved other innocent lives. Looking back, I realized that Margaret was wrong about one thing. I was never alone, even during the darkest years of deception and manipulation. Elena never stopped searching for me. My real parents' love transcended their deaths, and my capacity for justice was stronger than Margaret's capacity for evil. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? How do you think you would handle learning that your entire childhood was built on lies designed to benefit the people who destroyed your real family? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own experiences with family betrayal or moments when you discovered the truth about people you thought you knew. If this story of family karma and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in the darkest moments. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear about the power of truth and the importance of never giving up on justice, no matter how long it takes. Thank you for joining me on this journey from devastating betrayal to ultimate vindication. Remember that the truth always finds a way to surface. Family is about more than blood relations, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let evil people continue hurting innocent victims. Until next time, may your chosen family be filled with people who see your worth and never make you question whether you deserve love and protection.